This lecture summarizes voice leading with the dominant 7th chord, and it's based on material introduced in Leitz's The Complete Musician, Chapter 6. So in Chapter 5, we introduced the concept of voice leading for 4 parts, and went over several general principles. Among these are the principle of minimal motion. What this means is that each voice part features primarily stepwise motion with minimal leaps. One should also avoid voice crossing. This occurs when a higher voice moves below a lower voice or vice versa. For example, a soprano moving below the alto part would be an example of voice crossing. Also, one should avoid voice exchange. This occurs when a note that is carried in consecutive chords is passed around between different voices rather than being sustained in the voice that first introduces it. This creates unnecessary leaps and can be avoided by keeping the same chord or the shared tone in the same voice part moving forward. One should ideally double the root. If it is necessary to double another part of a chord, it is acceptable to double the third. It is not permissible to omit the root or the third when composing in 4-part voice leading. However, if necessary, one can omit the 5th. This often occurs when working with chordal 7ths or with 5/7 chords. One should generally adhere to the principles of species counterpoint as well. So again, avoiding excessive leaps or awkward leaps, avoiding parallel perfect intervals like perfect octaves or perfect fifths, and so forth. So in the example on the right, you'll see a perfect authentic cadence. The bass is moving from 5 down to 1. The soprano is moving from 7 up to 1. We have minimal leaps. Only one voice is actually leaping in this chord. The root is doubled in both the downbeat chord, the 5 chord, and the weak beat 1 chord. And we have complete chords in both cases, so the chord components, the root, the 3rd, and the 5th, are included in both of these sonorities. Now, with the addition of the 5/7, there are a couple other factors we need to consider, and that is the proper resolution of tendency tones. We've already talked a little bit about the leading tone having a tendency to move to 1. With the addition of the chordal 7th in the 5/7 chord, that is scale degree 4, we have to deal with another tonal tendency, which is for scale degree 4 to move to scale degree 3. So in the example below, you'll see that once again we have a perfect authentic cadence. The bass is moving from 5 to 1. The soprano is moving from 2 down to 1, so it's approaching 1 by step. The tonal tendency of the leading tone, in this case G natural, is resolved because the G moves up to the tonic, A flat. And the tonal tendency of the chordal 7th, or scale degree 4, is also realized. We have a D flat moving down to a C in the tenor part. Alright, so I thought it might be helpful just to review a little bit of basic Roman numeral analysis, since this is also relevant to error detection and correcting 5/7 to 1 cadences. And so in this case, take a look at the Roman numeral analysis that is applied to these 2 chords pitched in F minor. You'll see that we're actually missing the leading tone. The 7th scale degree has not been raised, and so what we actually have is a minor 5/7 chord that's not a dominant 7. And then the resolution chord, the 1 chord, is not in fact a major 1, but a minor 1. So correcting the issue of the raised 7th scale degree, I now have a proper 5/7 chord moving to minor 1. You'll see that this is another perfect authentic cadence. The soprano part moves from 2 to 1, the bass moves from 5 to 1, and all of the tonal tendencies are properly resolved. I have a raised 7th, that is scale degree 7 moving up to 1, and then the 4th scale degree, or the chordal 7th in the 5/7 chord, B flat, is moving down to A flat. Once again, we have a complete 5/7 chord moving to an incomplete 1 chord. There are a couple of issues in this example. First and foremost, we have a chordal 7th or scale degree 4 that is not properly resolved. Instead of moving down to 3, this chordal 7th is moving up to 5. There's also an issue of inappropriate doubling on the 1 chord. You'll see that there are 2 roots and 2 fifths, but no third. The third of the chord is not included there. So remember that it is acceptable to omit the 5th if necessary, but it is not acceptable to omit the 3rd. The 3rd must be included. So we can kill two birds with one stone here by appropriate resolution of the chordal 7th, or scale degree 4 down to 3. You'll see that now the one chord includes a doubled root, a third, and a fifth. Now in this case we have an incomplete 5-7 chord. The 5-7 is missing the fifth, C, moving to a complete one chord. This example features another issue with inappropriate resolution of tonal tendencies. You'll see that the chordal 7th, or scale degree 4, in E minor, that's going to be A, is appropriately resolved down to G. However, the leading tone, D sharp, is not moving up to scale degree 1. It's not resolving to the tonic. So there's a couple of possible solutions we could apply. One of them would be simply to move the soprano B up to E. That would give a tripled root and a third, so that's okay. Another solution is to swap the soprano and tenor parts, so that instead of having a tenor moving from F sharp down to E, I now have the soprano taking that part, and the tenor now has the leading tone 7th moving down to 5. So there is an exception to the rule that the 7th scale degree, or raised 7, has to resolve to 1, and that is that if sharp 7 is introduced in a middle voice, it's okay to move it down to a resolved to the 5th scale degree as its resolution. The reason being that it's not going to sound unresolved when it's buried in the middle of a thicker texture. And so this is consequently one way where you can get a complete 5-7 moving to a complete 1 chord by burying that sharp 7 in the midst, in the alto or the tenor part, and so that it's not so audible that it's not moving to 1. So a key point here is that the 5-7 chord is actually a dissonant chord. Up until this point we haven't worked with any dissonant chords in voice leading. We have only worked with triads, 5 and 1. And so when working with triads, you have two thirds, a lower and an upper third that are both consonant, and an outer fifth that is also consonant. But with the introduction of the chordal 7th, you now have two new dissonances. One of them is, of course, the 7th that's produced between the root and the 7th of that chord. And the other is the tritone that is introduced between the third of the chord, the chordal 3rd, and the chordal 7th. And so in this example, you'll see a dominant 7 chord built on C, where there is a minor 7 from C up to B flat, and a tritone in this voicing from B flat up to E. And so in working around these dissonances, a good way to approach this would be to think about this as not dissimilar from working with dissonances in species counterpoint. So there's a couple ways that we can appropriately introduce the chordal 7th as a melodic as well as a harmonic interval. One of those is to introduce the chordal 7th as a dissonant passing tone. And so in this example, you'll see that in the key of C major, the chordal 7th, or F, is introduced as a dissonant passing tone within a melodic progression from G down to E in the soprano part. So this is scale degrees 5, 4, 3, and the chordal 7th is introduced as a dissonant passing tone. Another way of treating the chordal 7th is to work it in as an upper or a lower neighbor. In this example, the soprano voice moves from scale degrees 3 up to 4 and then back down to 3. And so the chordal 7th is treated as an upper neighbor within a melodic motion from 3, 4, 3.